Of course, Darwin was completely unaware of genetics. And I would argue that I don't have a problem with evolution as a basic general fact that things biologically change. The question is, does the theory of evolution completely explain all biological life, the diversity, and the origin? To this day, nobody, there is not a single sufficient explanation for how life could emerge from non-life. That's a major problem. Not only that, but everything we know about those biological mechanisms suggests that they're limited. To give one example, every experiment we've done with fruit flies, what have we ended up with? Fruit flies. Even with, and these are of course with intelligent design. I mean, this is with people, presumably intelligent, scientists who are manipulating their genes. So, I would grant to you, yes, there is biological change. And that there's a lot of natural biological change. How much? That's open for debate. But in order to show that the argument for design is inadequate, you would have to show that the Darwinian thesis, or the neo-Darwinian thesis to be more accurate, would be a fully sufficient explanation. And I think that there's still a lot it has to explain, and it hasn't.
All right, so first to deal with Anthony.
I'm afraid actually we might need to move on to the question and answer period.
So I have to address this. Okay, so this was, so you mentioned one. There was, interestingly enough, there was 3 days ago, there was a report from Trinity College, a study they did, published in the Washington Post. And it showed that the level of unbelief in the US raised to 15%. Actually, if you study this exactly, you will see that's actually 24% in the US who do not believe in a personal God. So you have one who converted from atheist to theist. Well, I'll give you a raise in I don't know how many percent in all over the US. So that's again the argument by numeron. But that doesn't mean actually anything. So the other thing is...
so why raise it?
Right. So, well, but you raise an argument and then you expect me not to respond?
Well, I'd expect a response that is...
So I think it's not an argument to bring individual people what they believe.
Well, and I wasn't just appealing to Anthony Flew, I was appealing to the fact that Anthony Flew, who was an atheist, and felt that there is sufficient evidence, and particularly evidence from design, so it's in response to you.
I had the second point. This was part of it.
Go ahead, let him do it.
So, which is, and then you kind of attacked the evolutionary theory by saying, oh, it can't explain everything. Well, that's actually the beauty of science. Scientists do not jump around all day and say, oh, gravity works, and praise this. Scientists look at those things they cannot explain, and that's the beauty of science. And science is the discipline that admits that it doesn't know everything. And so to say, oh, evolution can't explain everything, there are certain gaps we don't know how life started. Well, that's true. Well, let's find it out, but not let's make gratuitous assumptions about gods without any further evidence.
Let me just respond. Once again, my point was, as I said earlier, notice I said the early scientists, and once again, the point of raising that was the early scientists, because of their theistic commitments, it wasn't because of money. If you read some of these guys, you read Galileo, you actually read Newton, these guys did believe in God. It wasn't just so they were put on some parade for the church. But once again, it was their theistic commitments, that guided them to say the world is intelligible, it's understandable. And even there, they weren't, and I think there are a number of scientists who are Christians, who are believers in God. And I would suggest to you that there may be a few, but do all of them jump to God of the gap arguments? I would say no. I think that's just it's a patently unfair statement.
All right, so we will now move on to the question and answer period. Please ask no more than one question, clearly and swiftly. Ask the question loudly enough for everyone to hear, or for the moderator, myself, to repeat. Please offer no statements. This is not a time for debate within the audience. So, all right. Sorry, gentlemen.
Hey, you said that...
Yeah.
Be loud. Hey, I heard you make a statement that the golden rule was good. How can we determine that if there's no God? On what basis can we determine what's good or what's bad?
All right, so, well, there's many things to be said about that. First of all, so the argument is that we get our morality from God. Okay? First of all, even if this were true, okay, it has no bearing on the question of whether or not God exists. Right? So it could be just a placebo effect. But then, to address your question directly, I think there are perfectly good examples or explanations for the development of morality, naturalistic explanations. And well, I ask you back, but he isn't allowed to respond, right? So it's a rhetorical question. So suppose somehow we came up with evidence that the Bible is just a man-made myth, okay? And so all what is in there is just man-made. Would you then go out and rape and murder and steal? No, you would not, right? And then look at all the atrocities that are described in the Bible. The genocide and giving your daughters away as sex slaves. You wouldn't approve of that, you don't. You pick those parts that you like. And why? Because you have a moral instinct that is independent of the Bible. And actually there was this Mark Hauser wrote a very nice book a few years ago, The Moral Minds, and he did a study, and he found out that over 90% or 95% of people in the world agree in their moral judgments, independent of whether they believe and which religion they believe in. So I think there's strong evidence that moral is naturalistic based and does not come from God or from the Bible.
Boy, I could spend an hour talking about this, but let me give you a quote from Michael Ruse, who is a well-known evolutionary ethicist, well-respected. In the anthology, probably said evolutionary ethics would have Ruse in there. He's a naturalist, he's not a theist. He says, what I believe is that the claims of normative ethics are like the rules of a game. In baseball, it is more that it is, if I can read my own writing here, it is true that after 3 strikes, the batter is out. But this claim does not have any reference or correspondence in absolute reality. What right have I to say, as an evolutionist, that normative ethics have no foundation? I have argued that normative ethics is a biological adaptation, and I would argue that as such, it can be seen to have no being or reality beyond this. We believe normative ethics for our own biological good, and that is that. I think that's an accurate description of evolutionary ethics. Now my question would be, I'm not questioning the ethics of atheists or naturalists. The question is, what grounds their conception of morality? Is there an objective basis? Is morality merely a physical, as you said, instinct? Well, if I have the instinct to push a little old lady out in front of a car, rather than help her across, why would that be wrong on strictly a naturalistic ethic? After all, one could make the argument that it's necessary for enhance the survival of the species.
So then, very briefly, I think, and I don't want to go into the details here, but I do think you can, from observations of pleasure and pain, we do like pleasure, we do not like pain, you can derive principles that tell you what is right and wrong because you want to avoid pain and you want to promote happiness among people. So you don't need God or any authority or supernatural being to do that.
Next question. Go to the front row.
This is a question for both for Michael Gurney, Dr. Michael Gurney.
Can we speak up, please?
This is a question for both of them. Michael Gurney first.
Use the mic. You're already tired.
Do we have evidence for every belief we have before we hold that belief?
I would say no, and I think it's quite obvious why. Because, for example, how many of you, when you woke up this morning, asked for evidence that the external world is real, or whether you existed? Yeah, I don't think too many people would. Oh, one of my students did. That's because he's taking philosophy. I take it that we all have certain beliefs. That's not to say that we can't scrutinize those beliefs, and I think Rene Descartes would be an example of somebody who did that. I also think it's important that we evaluate evidence. The kind of evidence that satisfies rational inquiry has to be based upon the nature of investigation, or what the object is being investigated.
I agree. We have certain beliefs, or we hold sometimes certain beliefs without having evidence in advance. So,
we agree on something.
yeah. I mean,
Going back to the the Bible, how do you explain the Dead Sea Scrolls that prove that what's in the Bible proves that they are true and actually happened?
All right, so this is kind of the argument by archaeological discoveries and maybe prophecies. I'm not an expert in the Bible, I have to admit that. But the point is that all these things that have been advanced as evidence for the truth of the Bible are kind of either, all these prophecies, for example, are either kind of vague or forced fulfillments or post-dated predictions or happened by chance. And archaeological discoveries like the Turin Shroud, for example, they don't constitute a good evidence for the existence of God. Not at all. I mean, even if it would have been found in a tomb and would be dated by carbon dating, 2,000 years old, and even if it had embroidered Jesus on top of it, it still would not be good evidence. I mean, so I don't know where you're going with that. I mean, there's so many, the Bible has been copied and translated and changed so many times to make it fit. And even that doesn't prevent it from numerous contradictions and just false information in it that I don't find it at all convincing evidence. It's not me, right? I mean, the majority of all the people in the world don't find it convincing, right? There's maybe 2 billion Christians in this world. Well, there are 4 billion people who are not Christians, who do not find this argument convincing, even after 2,000 years of Inquisition and Crusades and whatnot. So, okay, so sorry that I can't answer your question to the Sea Scrolls directly, but there have been books written about it, and I'm sure somebody could do that.
I'm going to actually agree with you partially. I'm going to agree with you partially, but I think you did get into what's called an ad hominem fallacy again. And it's not a question of how many people believe it. The question is, what is the level of evidence? And I would suggest that I agree with you. That's why I don't appeal to the Bible as a basis for belief in God. Although I think if one takes seriously certain claims, it makes sense in a theistic universe as opposed to a naturalistic universe. But I think that's a roundabout way to try to do that. I don't think the Dead Sea Scrolls prove Bible. What I think the Dead Sea Scrolls do, and this is typical of any kind of historical evidence that you do. You know, for example, take any historical event. You know, Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Historical evidence is rarely that kind of evidence you can say, oh, here's conclusive evidence. So I think we have to be very careful in terms of the weight of the evidence and what kind of conclusions we can draw and how conclusive those conclusions are. And so I think.
All right. I saw your hand.
This is for Dr. Erwig. What would it take that is evidence for you to acknowledge the possibility of God?
Okay, well, we could think of a number of things. Maybe a really, really exciting miracle. Okay, so I mean, you've often we hear these stories about Lourdes and how people are cured at Lourdes. But these are oftentimes things like, oh, somebody couldn't walk, now he can walk again, or couldn't move, now they can move again. I would like to see somebody growing a lost limb. So something like that. Or I could write down a 40-digit number, put it somewhere. And I'm sure we can come up with an experiment, and then somebody, and God knows it, he can predict it. And so I think we can come up with these kinds of tests. And so there's actually a website, Why Does God Hate the Amputees? They explore this question in more detail.
Yeah, let me respond in terms of a statement from Blaise Pascal. He says, there is sufficient light for those who desire to see, and there is sufficient darkness for those of the contrary disposition. I would suggest that, and this is referred to by philosophers as the hiddenness of God.